Inside the cavernous courtroom of Lakeview City, the murmurs of anticipation grew steadily. Judge Martha Campbell, a figure of authority with decades of experience, presided over the court with a practiced grace. As she shuffled through her documents, her stern brow and piercing gaze instilled an air of respect among everyone present. The trial was centered on David Hollis, a well-known businessman whose once shining reputation had taken a nosedive amid accusations of massive embezzlement from local charities. Over the years, Hollis had built his empire on philanthropy, positioning himself as the benevolent savior of Lakeview City. Yet, like a house of cards, the facade was beginning to crumble. The courtroom was bathed in the flickering fluorescent lights that seemed to somehow heighten the drama unfolding before them. Hollis, dressed in a tailored navy suit, sat at the defendant's table, flanked by a cadre of expensive lawyers, each wearing the look of cool detachment that betrayed their years of training in high-stakes litigation. His face was a picture of composure, but his fingers drummed an anxious rhythm on the polished wood surface. Every glance he cast around the room dripped with the anxiety of a man whose life was on the line. The TV cameras captured every angle, their red lights glaring like converging spotlights. Prosecutor Elaine Morgan, the embodiment of relentless determination, stood poised at the lectern, preparing to deliver her closing statements. She had invested countless hours into building her case, gathering testimonies from distraught charity workers, financial analysts, and various individuals who had once considered Hollis a friend. Her meticulously constructed narrative painted Hollis as a cunning mastermind who had manipulated the goodwill of the community for personal gain. This was not merely about stolen funds. It was about deception that had left scars etched in the hearts of those who had trusted him. "Your Honor," she began, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "Today, I stand before you to present a case not merely of money stolen, but of trust betrayed. David Hollis is accused of embezzling over $2 million, funds that should have supported our beloved Lakeview community." Her words resonated through the courtroom, igniting murmurs of solidarity as citizens reacted to the injustice. This case represents a theft that transcends finances. It is a crime against the very spirit of our town. A ripple of outrage coursed through the crowd as honeyed memories of charity events, smiles, and hope shifted into shadows of betrayal. Morgan continued to outline the intricate web of deceit starring Hollis, with a flourish that showcased organized charts and testimonies that had taken her months to compile. Just as Judge Campbell readied herself to respond, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open with a dramatic grating sound that cut through the whispered conversations. Every head turned in unison as a scruffy stray dog, thin and bedraggled, ambled confidently into the courtroom. The animal seemed out of place amid the stark formality of the setting, contrasting sharply with Hollis's pressed suit and the polished mahogany furniture. Yet, there was an inexplicable presence about the dog, who trotted down the aisle as if navigating a red carpet laid just for him. A cacophony of gasps and whispers broke the courtroom's tense silence. Eyes widened as the dog paused at the center of the room, casting its gaze upon the assembled crowd as if sizing them up, and then finally settling onto the defendant. In that moment, he seemed to survey both the audience and the unfolding drama as if he held the key to the very truth of the situation. Judge Campbell blinked, momentarily taken aback by the unexpected intruder. "What in the world?" she exclaimed, her voice a mix of surprise and authoritative command, but the stray simply stared at Hollis, tail wagging ever so slightly with an air of casual authority that seemed to mock the seriousness of the proceedings. Before the bailiff could react and escort the dog out, it barked, sharp and resonant, like a bell tolling. The sound echoed off the courtroom walls, causing those within to freeze momentarily as fear coursed through Hollis. The dog took a few steps forward, its stance resolute, and let out another bark, this one even louder, asserting its presence with undeniable insistence. "Is this some kind of joke?" Hollis's attorney, Mr. Carter, blurted out, incredulous as he swung around to face the assembled. "This dog has no place here. It's a courtroom, not a zoo." Just as tension began to rise and tempers flared, Morgan seized the opportunity, her instincts as a prosecutor surfacing. "Your Honor, I believe this dog may actually be significant to our case," she said, her voice rising above the din. This animal's sudden appearance could be more than mere coincidence. The murmuring intensified. The crowd shifted uneasily, caught between confusion and curiosity. Judge Campbell glowered at Morgan, and then back at Hollis, her interest piqued. "What do you mean by significant?" she asked, her tone skeptical yet intrigued. "Think about it," Morgan replied, pacing with an energy fueled by desperation for the truth. "This dog could lead us to evidence. If it was abandoned, it may have connections to either a witness or someone who can reveal more about what Hollis has done." As the bailiff approached the stray cautiously, the dog remained steadfast, holding its ground with unwavering resolve. "Your Honor, hold," the bailiff ordered as he knelt, shaking his head in disbelief. The dog continued to lay eyes on Hollis, a hypnotic stare that seemed to elicit a mix of dread and recognition from the defendant. "It's just a dog," Hollis grumbled, anger masking the fear evident in his voice. "It can't possibly be part of this trial," but the bailiff, still leaning down, noticed something glinting, something metallic, attached to the dog's collar. He listened to the crowd around him gasp as he unhooked a small rusted key, cradling it in the palm of his hand as if it might burn him. At that moment, as jurors exchanged questioning glances filled with intrigue, Judge Campbell's eye twitched, a palpable trend of urgency flashing across her face. "What is this?" she demanded, a mix of skepticism and curiosity breaking through her stern demeanor. "Bailiff, bring that key to me, immediately." The bailiff hurried it over, holding it aloft for everyone to see, and the murmurs began again, louder, more insistent this time. "Your Honor, I recognize that key," Morgan said, her voice steady but laden with weight. "It might correspond to a storage unit controlled by Mr. Hollis. One that has not yet been searched." Hollis's face paled, and he shifted in his seat, increasingly agitated. "No, this is absurd. That key doesn't lead to anything. It's just a stray dog." "Is that so?" Morgan shot back, her voice gaining strength. "Perhaps we should investigate this further? There could be documents, money, evidence hidden that could unveil the extent of your deception." "Your Honor," Carter interjected, brows furrowing in concern. "This is ridiculous. A dog's appearance in this trial should not constitute legitimate evidence, nor should we pursue any lines of inquiry based on the whims of a stray animal." But before the judge could respond, the stray dog let out a low growl, as though sensing the tension reaching a boiling point. It took a cautious step closer to Hollis, its eyes narrowing, a canine glare that sent chills down Hollis's spine. This act drew curious reactions from the jurors, and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Many spectators leaned forward. Some held their breaths in anticipation. A few spectators raised their smartphones, eager to capture what was surely destined to be the moment that would go viral. Judge Campbell slammed her gavel, her patience wearing thin. "Enough," she commanded, her voice breaking through the chaos. "Bailiff, secure the dog, but do not remove it from the courtroom just yet. I want to understand its significance, so let us adjourn for a brief moment." The courtroom emptied, leaving behind a whirlwind of emotions, pain, curiosity, anger, hope, while the stray sat quietly, still locked onto Hollis, who looked like he might be sick. Outside, reporters raced to file their stories. Headlines were already being penned in bold letters. "Stray dog disrupts high-stakes trial." "Eccentric twist in Lakeview's most infamous court case," and "What secrets lie beneath this dog's collar?" Back in the courtroom, Morgan leaned over the dog, whispering to it as if trying to connect with the spirit of this unexpected hero, or perhaps savior, before them. Every glance it cast back up at her felt laden with meaning. The dog seemed more attuned to the emotional undercurrents in the courtroom than anyone would ever guess. When the court reconvened, Hollis's expression crumbled, revealing a glimmer of desperation. His attorneys hastily whispered strategies, yet the atmosphere had shifted. "Your Honor," Hollis said, raising his hands in protest. This is a ridiculous farce. A dog cannot determine my fate. Judge Campbell leveled her gaze at him. You may be surprised by the developments of today, Mr. Hollis. Illusions are often shattered when the truth surfaces, and sometimes that truth arrives in the most unconventional of packages. Turning her attention back to the dog, she asked the court officer to bring it closer, wanting to explore the significance of that key further. We rendezvous at the crux of this trial. Perhaps it's time we find out what other mysteries this stray may reveal, she asserted just as the bailiff approached with the dog on a loose leash. All eyes turned to the dog as if expecting it to speak up or perhaps to reveal secret messages. Morgan leaned closer, her heart racing with anticipation, keenly aware of the fragile web that had been spun in the unfolding drama. Bailiff, the judge said, if we are to truly understand the relevance of this key, let us investigate its origins and purposes. How did this stray come by it? What does it unlock? Hollis, his jaw clenched tightly, rose slowly to his feet, edging toward the truth he had been evading. You cannot be serious, Your Honor. This is lunacy. But even he, for the first time in the trial, glanced from the corner of his eye at the dog. There was an unspoken challenge in the air as the courtroom held its collective breath, an anticipation that transcended mere legal proceedings. It was existence woven through layers of trust, betrayal, and hidden truths. And beneath the surface of this unexpected courtroom drama, with a stray dog acting as the catalyst, lay a mystery wrapped in fur and uncertainty, a mystery that had the potential to unravel the very fabric of perception and redefine what truth meant within the walls of law and justice. The drama was far from over, and everyone present sensed it. As the gavel fell once more to signal the end of the break, the next steps in this extraordinary legal journey loomed ominously, and for David Hollis, the walls of his carefully constructed world began to close in around him. As the stray dog sat patiently in the center of the courtroom, his unassuming presence brought with it an aura of formidable conclusion, an answer waiting to emerge from a riddle layered in deception, trust, and the determination to restore justice to a community that yearned for the truth. As the courtroom settled once more, anticipation hung in the air like a thick fog. With all eyes locked onto the stray dog, who seemed to possess an uncanny awareness of the proceedings, Judge Martha Campbell tapped her gavel firmly, calling the court to order. The stray, undeterred by the authority in her tone, continued to sit with unwavering focus on David Hollis, who shuffled in his seat as if weighed down by invisible chains. Bailiff, bring the dog forward, Judge Campbell instructed, her voice commanding yet tinged with curiosity. The bailiff nodded, gently leading the stray dog to the front of the courtroom. In an act of deliberate hesitation, the judge allowed her gaze to run over the assembly of jurors, legal teams, and the townsfolk who had come to bear witness to this peculiar turn of events. The elderly man in the front row, who had once been a grumbling, skeptical voice in the community, now sat wide-eyed, his mouth agape, as if he were witnessing a miracle. Other spectators leaned in, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. Morgan kept her eyes trained firmly on the pup, sensing that it held an essential key to unlocking a myriad of truths surrounding the case. Your Honor, she began, her voice steadier now, I believe we should not only uncover what the key unlocks, but perhaps we should investigate how this dog came to be here. Its presence feels significant in more ways than one. With a contemplative nod, Judge Campbell replied, I concur. Does anyone in the audience recognize this dog or have any insight into where it may have come from? We need answers. At that moment, a woman in the back of the courtroom stood up, visibly anxious. I know that dog, she exclaimed, her voice quavering as she stepped forward. That's Rufus. He belongs to Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman on Winter Street. A ripple of recognition swept through the crowd. Whispers erupted. Mrs. Thompson? She's the one who always supported local charities. But how did Rufus end up here? Morgan seized the momentum, stepping forward. If Mrs. Thompson is connected to this dog, then perhaps she is also connected to Mr. Hollis's philanthropic activities, and perhaps even to the embezzlement allegations. Your Honor, I think we need to summon her to the stand. I second that motion, hollered Carter, his face flushed with uncertainty. This is becoming a circus. We can't allow evidence derived from a stray dog to dominate this trial. But Judge Campbell was too intrigued. No, we must find out more about this connection. Rufus may have been a silent observer to all of this. Let's bring in Mrs. Thompson before we proceed any further. Bailiff, take note and notify her to come here immediately. As the bailiff rushed out of the courtroom to fetch Mrs. Thompson, tension began to mount. The air was thick with speculation, a palpable excitement spilling into the atmosphere. What other connections lay hidden beneath the surface? With clear professionalism, Nathaniel cleared his throat and began, "Thank you, Your Honor." After reviewing statements from various charity organizations in Lakeview City over the last several years, my findings have raised serious concerns about the discrepancies in financial records connected to Mr. Hollis's enterprises. What kinds of discrepancies? Judge Campbell probed, leaning forward, narrowing her gaze on Hollis. We found that large sums of money intended for charity events were routinely misallocated, Fields began, his brow knitting together as he pressed to clarify his points. In some cases, donations were documented but never deposited. Other times, the amounts didn't align with the suggested budgets presented at the gala. Can you provide specific examples? Judge Campbell pressed, her demeanor broaching a balance between curiosity and stern authority. Yes, Fields replied, with a hint of frustration. After examining Mr. Hollis's Oscar Gala charity event paperwork from last year, we observed that approximately 25% of the funds reported as donated from corporate sponsors were unrecorded in the bank statements. Additionally, I've identified numerous patterns of repeated expenditures that indicated funds going towards services never rendered. Gasps erupted throughout the courtroom. Whispers of disbelief rippled through the crowd. Morgan seized the opportunity, their momentum solidifying. Would you attribute these discrepancies to negligence, or do you think they hint at a deeper, calculated scheme? Fields shifted in his seat, choosing his words carefully. Given the continual nature of these discrepancies and the involvement of multiple organizations, I would lean towards believing this could be systematic embezzlement rather than simple negligence. It implies someone on the inside has direct access to misappropriate funds at will. Hollis squirmed, his face contorting in a mixture of rage and anxiety. This is absurd, he shouted as the crowd shifted uneasily, the collective weight of evidence crushing down upon him like a tidal wave. Those accusations are baseless. I had no idea these audits were happening, and I refuse to be held responsible for vague assumptions. A murmur of discontent passed through the audience as Judge Campbell attempted to restore order. We have a series of statements here that establish a compelling scenario, Mr. Hollis. It is now incumbent upon you to provide clarity or face the consequences of this avalanche of witness testimony against you. The air thickened as emotions became heightened. Members of the audience leaned toward each other, sensing an ethical rift forming, divided between sympathies for Mrs. Thompson's dog, the elderly woman herself, and the prospering businessman who had once been a hero, a complex hero now ensnared in a labyrinth of deceit. "Your Honor," Morgan interjected, her voice rippling through the courtroom. "May I submit into evidence the records of these audits along with the key retrieved from Rufus as we build upon our allegations of misuse and misdirection?" "Absolutely," Judge Campbell replied, her demeanor exhibiting the gravitas of a trial on the brink of realization. "Proceed." As the records were brought forth, the stray dog, Rufus, lay down quietly while human lives swung, twisted, and turned around him like a pendulum caught in a cosmic loop. Unbeknownst to those assembled, more secrets were simmering beneath the surface, waiting to be unveiled. A buried truth awaited revelation, rich with implications that could once and for all shift the ground beneath the feet of all involved. And as Judge Campbell prepared to rule on the next steps of the trial, the air pulsated with a sense of inevitability. Deep within, one question loomed larger than all others. How far had the tendrils of deception intertwined between Hollis and the community he had once vowed to protect? Little did they know, the key wasn't just a key but a pathway leading toward uncharted territory, complex tales intertwined with longing, betrayal, and a tale of accountability begging for resolution. As the courtroom buzzed with anticipation, each soul present felt the pressing weight of revelations yet to unfold. Judge Martha Campbell had summoned her strongest resolve and zeroed in on David Hollis, who appeared increasingly fraught with anxiety as he scrutinized the evidence piled against him. "Mr. Hollis," the judge began, her voice firm yet composed, "given the compelling statements from both Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Fields, we need you to provide clarity regarding your financial activities linked to the disputed charities and the missing funds. Are there explanations you wish to offer for these discrepancies?" Hollis clenched his fists, each thrum of his heartbeat reverberating through his system. "I had nothing to do with any misallocation or mismanagement," he finally blurted, his voice rising, breathless with indignation. "The charities were successful. I've worked tirelessly to ensure their prosperity. The money was meant for the community, and any errors would be the fault of my accounting team. But you had authority over those accounts and made final decisions regarding expenditures," Morgan countered, her voice steady with conviction. "Control of the funds resides in your hands. Your expertise in finance suggests knowledge of where those funds went, which contradicts your claims of ignorance." The crowd erupted in a low murmur, a wave of disbelief that washed over many as they turned their attention back to Hollis, who looked as if he might crumble under the collective scrutiny. Showcasing a previously unseen fragility, Hollis's voice quaked as he attempted to counteract the ramifications of Morgan's words. "I am not a criminal. My intent was never to harm anyone. I would never steal from this community. It's all just a misunderstanding. You must believe me." "Mr. Hollis," Judge Campbell interjected with calm authority, "misunderstandings can only hold ground when addressing mere mistakes. However, the evidence before us suggests a far more troubling narrative. Every decision you made has led us to this point, and every conversation claimed by witnesses continues to paint a picture beyond mere mismanagement." Hollis pressed his palm against the table, grounding himself as if the wood beneath him might revive his resolve. I assure you, I have contributed to many charities. I supported local food banks, shelters, children's programs. I am not without heart." Yet, Morgan saw through his deflections, narrowing her gaze. "We are not disputing your contributions to charity. Rather, we are questioning the integrity of those contributions. Are you suggesting that caring for the community can coexist with siphoning funds? Riding on the coattails of altruism while perpetrating such unscrupulous acts?" The crowd shifted uncomfortably, and the air grew thick with tension as they collectively leaned into Morgan's rhetorical inquiry, sensing the gravity of ethical implications masked in Hollis's desperation. "Your Honor," came a voice from the back of the room, a confident, articulate tone. The figure stepped into view, a determined young woman with striking red hair and shrewd green eyes. "If I may interject, I believe I can provide vital information regarding the specifics of the accounts in question and further expound upon Mr. Hollis's relationship with the charities." All eyes turned toward her as Morgan's brows arched in surprise. "And who might you be, miss?" "Elaine Carter," she stated with certainty. "I've been the treasurer for several of the charities Mr. Hollis is involved with, overseeing the financial reporting specifically pertaining to each gala event, including last year's Oscar Gala." A whirlwind of murmurs swirled throughout the courtroom, interspersed with speculative questions about Elaine's intentions. Judge Campbell raised her gavel, silencing the room. "Proceed, Miss Carter. We welcome your insights." As Elaine took the stand, she seemed to draw her strength from the collective anticipation before her. "Thank you, Your Honor. I've had the privilege of witnessing firsthand the impact of the charitable events spearheaded by Mr. Hollis. However, in recent months, I uncovered a few alarming discrepancies while managing the financial records." Judge Campbell leaned forward, encouraging her to continue. "Could you elaborate on the nature of those discrepancies?" "Certainly," Elaine replied, smoothing out her blouse as her composure solidified. "During the audits, I discovered that certain donations were logged but never reached their intended causes. Donations from sponsorships that should have been earmarked for charities instead appeared to be redirected into personal accounts associated with Mr. Hollis. It raises significant red flags." A collective gasp filled the room like a gasp of wind across a quiet field, and Hollis's pallid complexion turned a shade of crimson in disbelief. "That's categorically false," he exclaimed, rising to his feet. "These are baseless claims meant to tarnish my character." "No, Mr. Hollis," Elaine persisted, her voice steadying as she held his gaze. "The evidence is there. You made arrangements with your associates to mask the diversion of funds, and I was oblivious to the details until they raised my concerns. One of your former associates, Ben Riggins, pointed out the oddities in the accounting logs before suddenly leaving the organization under mysterious circumstances. His departure turned my suspicion into alarm." Silence engulfed the courtroom, each breath taken in unison as every person tried to process Elaine's powerful testimony. The gravity of potential betrayal hung fresh in the air, an idea both devastating and illuminating. "Ben Riggins?" Morgan mused aloud. "I think we should bring him in for questioning. His testimony could play a critical role in understanding the relationship between Mr. Hollis and the alleged misappropriated funds." Hollis, however, seemed impervious to the shifting courtroom tide, floundering in defensiveness. "Ben is not credible. He was in over his head and didn't know how to handle the financial records either. He's clearly trying to vindicate himself by dragging me into this." Elaine shot back, "That's not what I observed, Mr. Hollis. There was no mismanagement in my position. We did what we could, but you were the one who set the tone for our operations. You kept us in the dark while you siphoned off funds." "Enough!" thundered Judge Campbell, the frustration in her tone echoing through the chamber like a hammer striking an anvil. "Mr. Hollis, this is carrying on far longer than necessary. I urge you to reveal the truth before it dismantles your entire awaited legacy before this community." As Hollis's grip on reality weakened, an idea flickered in his troubled gaze. "Rufus," he shouted suddenly, pointing at the dog that lay quietly at Mrs. Thompson's feet. A sudden surge of desperation drove him to salvage the remains of his grandeur, relying on the same diversion that had brought the trial to a new level of absurdity. The dog had nothing to do with any of this. He's simply been used as theater fodder. My own reputation cannot be diminished by tales of a stray dog. His cheeks flushed with mounting frustration. Morgan took a steadying breath. But perhaps the key you so readily dismissed may lead us to vital records. Perhaps it's more than mere diversion, Mr. Hollis. The key may unlock far more than a simple storage unit. It could reveal the truth, everything we need to place your motives into question. "Can this be rescheduled?" A voice rose suddenly from the audience. One of the charity workers who often attended the galas, an ally turned confidant for the once admirers of Hollis. "No," he shouted. "There's nothing to hide. The error of the funds has to be unraveled." In that moment, the entire courtroom buzzed with tenacity. It was clear that Rufus was not merely an innocent bystander in this colossal web of deception. He was a sentinel to hidden truths that lingered in the echoes of files locked away from view. Whispers circulated as an idea grew like wildfire, germinating with enthusiasm. People began to consider how they could connect the key, the accounts, and the dog who could orchestrate their aspirations of truth alongside the weight of the charges against Hollis. Suddenly, it felt as if a collective epiphany had ignited the room, turning it into a cauldron of hope. "Offer us access to that storage unit," Morgan implored. "We may just connect the dots and shed light upon what truly happened to those funds." Judge Campbell nodded sagely, the air thick with an atmosphere of investigation, a collective sense of purpose burgeoning. "Mr. Hollis," she teased out with subtle pressure, "will you provide us entry to the locations linked to these claims? It may prove to be the turning point in this trial. Do not further obscure what the outcome will deliver." With desperation clawing at the edges of Hollis's composure, the storm that had been brewing within finally erupted. He leaned closer to Judge Campbell, his voice trembling as he whispered, I will comply. I'll reveal where the storage unit is and access should be granted. Not that it will prove any wrongdoing." "I don't need you to prove anything," Judge Campbell stated. "Just be honest and allow us the investigation. That will suffice for the court and your integrity." The sound of the gavel reverberated like a starting whistle, signaling the start of new inquiries and the exploration of connections across this case. The weight of the courtroom metaphorically lifted with newfound hope and urgency, a mission now founded in the collective desire for truth. As the court adjourned for a brief recess, those within began to ponder the new leads, conversations bubbling up with excitement. Rufus, instead of being merely a passive observer enveloped in chaos, had savored the spotlight that came from his very presence. A stray dog, initially viewed as a distraction, now harbored the very essence of hope for Lakeview City. Judge Campbell smirked knowingly, acknowledging that beneath the top-layer chaos lay a compelling narrative worth exploring. A narrative that could bring redemption not only to individuals, but perhaps a community yearning for restoration amidst the cavern of betrayal. The journey for justice wouldn't merely reveal whether Hollis was guilty. It would also tell the story of the unbreakable bond between community, trust, and the pursuit of truth interwoven together, capturing the essence of not just this courtroom, but the very spirit of Lakeview, a renewed commitment toward accountability that would echo through generations to come. While the courtroom waited, Morgan began to piece the puzzle together in her mind. She envisioned Mrs. Thompson at the local charity luncheons, her palm resting gently on the little dog at her feet as she poured her heart into supporting the community. Why hadn't anyone questioned her? She seemed an innocent party in a tangled web of deceit. After what felt like an eternity, the bailiff returned, leading an elderly woman with soft wrinkles framing her face, a testament to a lifetime filled with kind smiles and laughter. Mrs. Thompson, with her warm gaze and flowing silver hair, was a beloved figure in Lakeview. Rufus's tail wagged furiously as he recognized her, trotting over to her side once more. "Your Honor," Morgan began, gesturing toward Mrs. Thompson, "I would like to call Mrs. Thompson to the stand." As Mrs. Thompson took her place, she regarded Judge Campbell with a nervous smile. "I'm not sure why I'm here, but I hope I can help in some way," she said, her voice tremulous yet steady. "Mrs. Thompson," the judge said gently, "we would like to understand how Rufus came to be here today and what role he might play in this trial." "Well," Mrs. Thompson began, her eyes brightening at the mention of her beloved dog, "Rufus has been with me for years. He's a loyal companion and loves people, especially those in need. I often bring him with me when I go to visit the local charity organizations." She hesitated but continued, "I'm certain many here know how dedicated I am to supporting our town. But lately, I've felt as if something was off." "What do you mean, off?" Morgan pressed. "It's just that sometimes I notice things that startled me. I attended a charity gala hosted by Mr. Hollis, and Rufus seemed restless that night. He kept trying to get my attention, barking as if he sensed something was wrong." Mrs. Thompson chewed her lip, her brow nodding in confusion. "I dismissed it, but now I can't shake the feeling that he knew something untoward was happening." "Do you recall any specific conversations or observations you made that night?" Judge Campbell inquired, her eyes narrowing as she leaned in, intent on uncovering more threads entwined in the tapestry of deceit. "Yes, Your Honor," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "There was a conversation I overheard between Mr. Hollis and his associate. They were discussing funds, and I thought they were simply addressing donations. But I distinctly remember Mr. Hollis saying, 'Make sure no receipts get out,' before they hurried away. I assumed it was about a private meeting regarding future sponsorships." The courtroom fell silent, the implications of her words weaving a thick narrative thread through the minds of all present. Hollis shifted uncomfortably in his chair, beads of sweat trickling down his forehead. The once sturdy facade of composure was grasping at straws, and the faces in the gallery turned their attention to him, their expressions mixed with skepticism and incredulity. "I had no idea those words would have more weight than I imagined," Mrs. Thompson continued, her voice trembling with unease. "I only thought I was listening to normal business chatter. Now I feel horrible." Morgan took advantage of the fragile atmosphere, nodding gently. "Thank you for your honesty, Mrs. Thompson. It appears your connection to Mr. Hollis and Rufus may provide valuable insights. If the dog reacted to wrongdoing, there is potentially much more to uncover." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Carter interjected, clearly flustered. "If all we have is an elderly woman's recall of hearsay whispered in a gala setting, we are grasping at straws." "We have more than mere hearsay," Morgan retorted, confident in her assertions. "We have evidence that suggests a pattern of mismanagement and misdirection from Hollis." Mrs. Thompson's statement adds credence to the theory that funds may have moved in ways they shouldn't have. "Let's not forget that Rufus' instincts might have led him to uncover something we've yet to realize." The dog whimpered as if it understood the weight of the situation, still aiming wide-eyed up at Mrs. Thompson, who continued to stroke his fur for comfort. The tension in the room rose again, this time menacingly, as the gravity of the trial deepened. "Let us proceed," Judge Campbell intoned, guiding her court back toward clarity. "This case is evolving in ways I could not have predicted. We must consider Rufus's behavior a clue. Mrs. Thompson, as you leave the stand, please keep those observations in mind. We may have further questions for you later." As she left the witness stand, the previous discord settled into an anticipatory hush. The impossibility of the previous events lingered as the courtroom buzzed with energy. The judge eyed Hollis, whose demeanor had shifted markedly. Stripped of bravado, he appeared small under the weight of unfolding evidence and scrutiny. "Mr. Hollis," Judge Campbell said, her voice steady and piercing, "you are now tasked with explaining why witnesses have claimed to hear conversations of malfeasance, all while this dog seems to sense it before us." "I didn't," Hollis stammered, desperation creeping into his voice. He attempted to recover composure. "The funds were all legitimate. Charity events provide avenues for funding. We are all aware of the blurred lines in fundraising." But Judge Campbell was adamant. "This is not simply about the nature of fundraising, Mr. Hollis. This is about truth and accountability. The dog's presence here signifies something more. We owe it to the community to uncover what happened to those missing funds and how they tie into your affairs." Caught between the growing sense of dread and the expectations around him, Hollis finally snapped. "The dog is a distraction, Your Honor. Nothing more. This is an absurd joke that's gone too far. I demand this trial focus on evidence, not on some stray mutt barking at shadows." His outburst reverberated through the chamber, earning him stern glances from jurors who had grown weary of his increasingly frantic denials. "Perhaps it is time for Mr. Hollis to clarify a few more details about his financial dealings," Judge Campbell stated coolly. "Let's call our next witness." The courtroom took in a collective breath as Morgan prepared to finish lining up her witnesses, summoning a financial analyst who had been closely following the charitable funds. The bailiff made swift arrangements, closing the door behind him before motioning for the next witness to enter. As the analyst walked in, a nervous excitement buzzed amongst the attendees. "Your Honor," Morgan said, following propriety, "I present to you Mr. Nathaniel Fields, a senior accountant who has conducted audits on the charities in question." "Welcome, Mr. Fields," Judge Campbell greeted, her voice steady and formal as the man took his place on the witness stand. "Please share your findings regarding the charity contributions related to Mr. Hollis." And in the midst of it all, the bond between a wallflower dog and a woman who stood for justice, empowered to restore hope in their beloved town, lit their path forward. This was only the beginning, yet it would come to define how intertwined their fates had become as the echoes of truth grew louder in the chambers of justice. As the courtroom reconvened, Hollis's reluctance seemed to grow. Judge Campbell's words echoed in the silence, reminding him of the gravity of his decision. The judge's gaze never wavered, her eyes fixed on Hollis as she pressed for answers. "Very well, Mr. Hollis," she said, her voice firm but measured. "You've agreed to provide us access to the storage unit. Now let's move forward. Where is it located?" Hollis's shoulders slumped, a mixture of desperation and fear etched on his face. It's a unit at the local storage facility on Oak Street," he stammered. Judge Campbell nodded. Very well. We'll have a storage facility open the unit immediately. In the meantime, Mr. Fields, I'd like you to review the security footage from the facility to ensure that no one has tampered with the evidence since Hollis accessed the storage unit last. Morgan nodded, taking a few notes on her pad. Already on it, Your Honor. As the courtroom erupted into a flurry of activity, Hollis's demeanor seemed to shift. He appeared to be trying to come to terms with the consequences of his actions, but it was too late. The damage had been done. Outside the courtroom, Morgan, Judge Campbell, and a team of investigators arrived at the storage facility. After securing permission from the storage facility manager, they made their way to the storage unit Hollis had mentioned. Inside the unit, they found a single unlocked file cabinet. Morgan quickly opened it, revealing a stack of files and documents tied with a red ribbon. She carefully untied the ribbon, her eyes scanning the contents. "What do we have here?" Morgan asked, her voice muffled by the storage unit. Judge Campbell peeked over Morgan's shoulder. "It looks like a detailed accounting of the missing funds, as well as some rather incriminating emails and documents." Morgan's eyes widened as she began to read through the files. "This is it. This is the evidence we need to prove Hollis's guilt." Judge Campbell nodded. "Let's get these back to the lab for analysis. We'll get to the bottom of this." As they carefully collected the evidence and left the storage facility, Morgan couldn't help but wonder what other secrets Hollis might be hiding. Back in the courtroom, Hollis was being questioned by Judge Campbell, who had just been handed a stack of files and documents from Morgan. "Mr. Hollis," Judge Campbell said, her voice firm, "it appears that we've found evidence of your guilt. Care to explain these documents and emails?" Hollis's eyes widened in panic as he realized the extent of Morgan's discovery. No. "It can't be," he stuttered. I didn't mean to." Judge Campbell cut him off. "The evidence speaks for itself, Mr. Hollis. You've been found guilty of embezzlement, fraud, and other serious crimes. You'll be taking a long, hard fall." As the courtroom erupted in chaos, Judge Campbell banged her gavel, silencing the room. "Order. Order in the court." But it was too late. Hollis's downfall had begun, and nothing could stop it now. As the courtroom continued to buzz with the news, Elaine, the young woman who had provided crucial testimony, couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. "Justice has been served," she said to no one in particular. Morgan nodded in agreement. "We've done it, Elaine. We've brought a corrupt system to its knees." Judge Campbell smiled, a hint of satisfaction in her eyes. "A long time coming, but it's finally happened. Justice has been served." And as the courtroom continued to buzz with the news, Rufus, the stray dog, lay quietly at Elaine's feet, his eyes gleaming with a quiet sense of satisfaction. The end of an era had begun, one that would see justice served and a corrupt system brought to its knees. Epilogue. As the dust settled, Hollis was taken away in handcuffs, his reputation in tatters. Judge Campbell presided over the sentencing, her voice firm but measured. "Mr. Hollis," she said, "you've been found guilty of serious crimes. You'll be serving a lengthy sentence, one that will take you far away from this community." Hollis's eyes flashed with anger as he heard the sentence. But justice had been served. The people of Lakeview had seen their leader fall, and it was a moment they would never forget. The city began to heal, slowly but surely. And Elaine, the young woman who had provided crucial testimony, was hailed as a hero. Her bravery and determination had brought justice to a corrupt system, and she had done it with the help of a stray dog named Rufus. The story of Rufus and Elaine would live on, a reminder of the power of courage and determination in the face of adversity. And as for Rufus, he had found a new home, one with a family who loved him and cared for him. But Rufus knew that he would always be a reminder of the events that had unfolded in the courtroom, a symbol of the power of justice and the impact it could have on the lives of those around him. And though he had found a new family, he would always remember the courtroom, the judge, and the brave young woman who had stood up for what was right.